Saudi Arabia has held the first meeting of a new Islamic counterterrorism alliance. The kingdom's crown prince, Mohammad bin Salman, has vowed to pursue terrorists until they are wiped from the face of the earth. Sunday's gathering is the Islamic Military Counterterrorism Coalition's first meeting since the group's formation was announced in 2015. There are 41 countries in the coalition, most of them Sunni majority or ruled by Sunnis. Shia-dominated Iran, as well as Syria and Iraq, are excluded. The meeting comes amid escalating tensions between Riyadh and Tehran. Earlier last week, Russia, Iran, and Turkey have also launched a major diplomatic push to end the Syrian crisis. For more about this, we are joined in our Beijing studio by Yan Shuai, an analyst at the Anti-Terrorism Center at the China Institute of Contemporary International Relations. In Riyadh, we have Salman Al-Ansari, a political analyst who is the founder and president of the Saudi American Public Relations Affairs Committee. In Boston, we have once again Jim Walsh, who is with the Security Studies program with Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Gentlemen, I want to welcome to the three of you. Exactly, Mr. Al-Ansari, how should we interpret this first meeting since the group was founded in 2015 when it comes to anti-terrorism?
Thank you, Yan Shuai, for having me. It's actually a very important step that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has taken with its allies in the Muslim world. If we look at the time of the inception of this coalition, it was actually in the 15th of December 2015, so it was like almost 2 years ago. And right now they have actually told the people and made it public about the strategies and the matrix and the KPIs of this coalition and its objectives, which is very important, because right now in the Arab and Muslim world and in the whole world, we are actually facing, let's call it by its name, an existential threat, which is radicalism, extremism, and how there are countries that want to radicalize the youth and how they want to take over countries, etc. So if we look at this, I think it's a very important step that the kingdom has taken.
Wow.
It's a coalition. It's the biggest of its kind. It's the biggest of its kind when it comes to the Muslim world being in one synthesized kind of objective to combat terrorism, not only to combat it militarily, but also the 3 M's, men, mindset, and money, to go and combat it from its roots, which is a very good step, and I encourage it highly.
All right, Al-Ansari, I can see you're a cheerleader of that strategy and certainly the meeting, but many say it wouldn't take place if Iran has not got an upper hand in the Middle East over Saudi Arabia toward the issue of terrorism. Very briefly from you, sir.
Yan Shuai, so the question was to me?
The question, yes, that is to you, Mr. Al-Ansari.
Okay, perfect. Actually, Martin Luther King said something remarkable. He said, darkness cannot drive out darkness. Light only can do that. So I think Iran is a source of darkness in the region. So I'm not very surprised that it's not actually part of this coalition, because if we look at Iraq, Iran is supporting 75 Iranian-backed militias just in Iraq. They are supporting Hezbollah, which is internationally recognized as a terrorist group. They are supporting Houthis, which is actually going against the will of the United Nations and the UN Resolution 2216. So I'm not very surprised that Iran is excluded. And
but they're also fighting IS. They
Iran,
have just claimed a virtual victory against IS, Mr. Al-Ansari.
Sorry, I couldn't hear your question.
Iran just claimed a virtual success against IS also, which is also internationally recognized as a terrorist group.
Yes, definitely. Saudi Arabia is actually part of the coalition to combat the global coalition to combat ISIS, which is a great. We have seen a great deal of achievements in the region when it comes to combating ISIS. Iran claims to be in combating ISIS, but I don't think it's actually very accurate. If we go and look at things on the ground, we will realize that actually Iran, in so many instances, have actually benefited from the rise of ISIS, specifically in Syria, so they can protect the Bashar al-Assad, the brutal militant regime in Syria. So let's have it very clear. It's very clear to the region, it's very clear to the world that any militant, despicable group that wants to take over countries in the region by using the ideology of political Islam, etc., will be confronted heavily, not only by the region, but by the whole Muslim world and by the whole world.
Let's go to Mr. Walsh. I see you waving your head from time to time while your colleague in Riyadh is talking. Help us to understand your thought.
Well, you know, if this was what it says it is, I'd be all in favor of it. I mean, who's against battling terrorists? But you know, I'm deeply skeptical, and I must say my colleague from Saudi Arabia gives us all the reason for skepticism. Right? He begins by saying terrorism, and then he spends the next, you know, most of his time talking about how bad Iran is. This is not about terrorism. It's about Saudi Arabia's rivalry with Iran. That's its #1 priority, not terrorism. Iran is its #1 priority. And, you know, I just can't take it very seriously. Saudi Arabia has supported violent religious extremists for years. Wahhabism has been the ideological bedrock of Sunni-led extremism. 90% of the deaths, according to one study, that come from terrorism come from Sunni groups, Sunni extremists, not Shias, not the Iranians or the Lebanese or others. And yet that's what the focus is. And the fact that you've excluded Iraq, Iran, Qatar, which you are, you know, basically trying to boycott while you carry out this, you know, campaign in Yemen, killing civilians, and then setting up an embargo to prevent humanitarian aid. I'm just really skeptical that Saudi Arabia is the shining light to fight terrorism. And this is really more about the new leaders, the new crown prince's aggressive, I would say, military program in the Middle East.
All right. Mr. Yan, you heard your two colleagues talking about different views, certainly, to say the least. One thing is for sure, the Middle East is changing so fast these days, just over the past few months as a result of decades of development, of conflicts and uncertainties. What do you make of Iran and Saudi Arabia both holding high, at least in rhetoric, the banner against the terrorism? Eventually, that rivalry will turn into what, Mr. Yan?
Yes, the meeting of the coalition after the establishment of 2 years, I think it signifies the intensified confrontation between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Because in recent several years, I think Iran has been improved its influences regionally and internationally. We see in Iraq, it helped the Iraqi government to eradicate ISIS in Iraq, and in Syria, it helped Assad regime to get rid of the ISIS also. And also in the Yemen, Iran are backing the Houthi rebels, while the Saudi Arabia are leading a coalition to fight the Houthi rebels. So I think this is not a good news for the region and also for the international community's campaign against terrorism, because the terrorism actually, I think, Islamic State is not defeated, although it almost lost all of the territory in Syria and Iraq, but ISIS is expanding and infiltrating to other places of the world. So I think the other members of the coalition, such as the weak and small Muslim countries, they have their own worries and own interest. They want the Saudi Arabia, they want the international community to help them to prevent the Islamic State from being expanded to their country.
Right. But having said that, though, Mr. Walsh, we need to look at some of the facts also. When we talk about so-called virtual success against Islamic State claimed by Iran, not long after Tehran said that, there was already a huge terrorist attack in Egypt, which was claimed by IS. Whether that's true or not, we do not know at this point, but this is very clearly demonstrating to us that IS is not just about clusters of ground forces that is showing on the map. It is scattered around the region with the potential of using ideology to seduce people. So, Mr. Walsh, how much is IS, from your perspective, being defeated now? Can any country claim a victory now, Mr. Walsh?
Well, we talked about this before, Tian, and my view has been we can defeat ISIS in terms of its original objective, which was setting up a caliphate. In other words, its first goal was to actually take a piece of territory and set up its own state. Well, they have failed at that. I think we can declare victory over that objective. And it wasn't just Iran. It was Iran and the Kurds, and it was the Iraqi forces and a variety of different groups and countries, the United States included, that were attacking ISIS, pushing them out of Iraq, and preventing them from setting up a state. So that's a victory. But, as we've discussed before, now they will shift, right? They will disperse. They will no longer have setting up the caliphate as their objective, and they will revert to terrorism. So the irony here, and it is an irony, is that while we have defeated them in terms of their first objective, setting up a state, nevertheless, what will probably happen, that will result in an increase, not a decrease, an increase in terrorism as they shift their objectives. And as they can no longer win on the battlefield straight up, fighting to fighting in a city, they will now shift increasingly to terrorism. So we will see more terrorism by them and by their affiliates in other countries, like in the Sinai in Egypt.
Things are not just as easy as it is between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Of course, there are a lot of complicating pictures of geopolitics as well behind, with some of the major powers of the world all having its influence in the region, and have as a result related to the issues of fight against terrorism. For now, I want to thank the three of you, gentlemen, whatever perspective you have, for your input and your insights. Yan Shuai, Salman Al-Ansari, Jim Walsh. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us, the three of you.